So to begin with a little context, Planet of Giants was not originally intended to be a season opening. It was just the next serial in the first production block for Doctor Who, but it later became the season 2 opener. It also has the unique distinction of being the first and only Doctor Who serial to have been recorded and then edited down in length, with it being written and recorded as a 4-parter and then edited down to a 3-parter. I'll explain more about that later, but I think it's important to get this out of the way before beginning, as it will explain some of the shortcomings in the last episode. This serial also has a few notable things going on behind the scenes. While episode 1 through 3 were directed by the show's associate producer Mervyn Pinfield, the final episode was the first to be directed by Douglas Camfield, a director who would go on to be one of the show's best and almost certainly the greatest in the black and white era. Additionally, this is the first score to be provided by Dudley Simpson, who would go on to be the main composer for the show in the 70s. It's also the first to be written by Louis Marks, who would go on to write several more serials, but all of those would be in the 70s. The serial begins with the Doctor busily operating the TARDIS controls, while the rest of the quartet are just walking around the room, as they do, waiting patiently for the next adventure, when suddenly the TARDIS doors open mid-materialisation, alarms blare and the Doctor shouts for the doors to be closed. And you know what? For a scene not intended to be the opener for a season, I think it's a bloody good one. The calmness as we see the Doctor flying the TARDIS, quickly followed by the panic as danger strikes, is a brief but perfect synopsis of the show. In just a few moments, the serial has re-established the tone and feeling of the show, and it's not done yet, as once the situation is calmed, the Doctor apologises to Barbara for shouting, and she understands the situation and the need for the panic.
Oh, my dear Barbara, was I rude to you just now? If so, I'm so sorry. I always forget the niceties under pressure. Please forgive me.
There's nothing to forgive.
Thank you.
And it's just so good. We're seeing their dynamic immediately and how close these two have become as they've grown as people. This is perhaps a perfect opening scene to a season. Moving on, the TARDIS lands next to what appears to be a high wall, but upon closer examination is made out of something that resembles concrete, but is far rougher. Plus there are no bricks. Also, when the Doctor turns on the scanner, it explodes, due to the image being too big for it. Which is strange, but more importantly, I do want to note that it's a clip of exploding glass played on the scanner, rather than the actual scanner exploding, which is something to keep note of for the end. Anyway, the quartet split up to explore, with the Doctor going with Barbara and Ian going with Susan. The Doctor and Barbara find what appears to be a snake, but in reality is a massive dead worm, while Ian and Susan find a massive dead ant and many large eggs before coming across a massive matchbox and giant cigarettes. Ian suggests the idea that this could be somewhat of an amusement park where everything is being made large, but Susan shuts this idea down, revealing that they've been shrunk down.
What's your theory then?
Well, these things haven't been made bigger. We've been made smaller.
We also get this nice zoom out shot going from the TARDIS to reveal the size against that of the garden it's landed at the edge of. The Doctor tells Barbara this fact at the same time, and I really do like how it's presented, with Ian and Barbara asking a question and there cuts to the other conversation for the answer. It's such a fun way to present it, and I think Susan coming to this realisation and getting to explain it is great for her. We're seeing her smarter scientific side, which was rarely shown in season 1. Now the reason for this shrinking is scientific nonsense, with the reason being, as the doors open during materialisation, the space pressure caused them to reduce in size. That's all for the reason, and it's not exactly explained how they reverse the process at the end, or at least explained well. Fortunately, not much attention is drawn to the whole shrinking thing on a scientific front, so I'm not going to make a big deal about it just sort of happening how it does. Getting back to the plot, a man named Farrow arrives and picks up the matchbox, trapping Ian inside. This leads to Susan reuniting with the Doctor and Barbara, who begin their journey across the garden to the house to rescue Ian. A man named Forrester arrives at the house to meet with Farrow, concerning his new pesticide, DN6, which Farrow has rejected. And this is where we are introduced to the message of the serial, as Farrow explains the reasons for the rejection of the new pesticide.
On the surface, DN6 appeared to have all the characteristics of a major breakthrough in the manufacture of insecticide. But the very exhaustive tests I have made show that DN6 is totally destructive. There are many insects which make a vital contribution to agriculture, and these insects must not die. Did you know that?
So this serial took inspiration from the book Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson, in which she detailed the effects and harm of synthetic pesticides which were created following World War II, notably DDTs. Now I'm not familiar with the book, and so like with the Reign of Terror I will not go into detail as to avoid spreading false or incorrect information, but the book swayed public opinion on these pesticides, which led to the banning of DDTs for agricultural use, and later the creation of the US Environmental Protection Agency, and this book led to this serial's creation. Now the idea of having the characters being shrunk down to miniature size had been floating around the production office since the origins of the show, with it being a potential idea for the first serial, an idea of Sidney Newman, but this never got off the ground for various reasons, both in terms of production and that there wasn't much plot beyond the shrinking. This was until Louis Marks used it for this serial and combined it with the pro-ecology plot, in which DN6 is a stand-in for these pesticides and is capable of killing all life. Forrester is a greedy man who will stop at nothing to get his product produced, even with the dangers. He knows how dangerous it is to insects and doesn't care what it kills, so long as it sells. His determination is reinforced by the fact that he sunk all of his money into it. But as the serial progresses, we learn that DN6 has the potential of harming and potentially killing humans in high enough quantities. Plus in the scene which was cut, we see it killing a cat, after being diluted in water. This serial has a potential end of the world scenario, but as the pesticide is yet to be produced en masse, the scale manages to feel small for the time being. But with the quartet shrunk down, it makes them nearly powerless to do anything, making them as weak as the insects which the pesticide was made to destroy, allowing the serial to show the danger from a unique viewpoint which emphasises the threat. The tension is also increased when Barbara becomes ill due to getting some of the pesticide on her hands in episode 3, giving the serial a ticking clock, making the threat more real and personal. But at the same time, this is where the serial's second biggest problem comes in, and that's the stupidity of the villain. Now Forrester is a big threat to the quartet, but in an attempt to get DN6 into development, he first kills Farrow by shooting him, and his story about what happened doesn't fool Smithers, the one who developed the pesticide.
I wouldn't try telling that story to the police if I were you.
Oh, why not?
Oh, don't be a fool, he's been shot through the heart from some feet away. Even I can see that, and I'm no expert.
From there, Forrester decides to move the body to Farrow's boat and stage a boating accident, despite the guy having clearly been shot. From there he disguises his voice for a phone call from Farrow to the Ministry, which doesn't even convince the woman at the phone exchange.
Sound like Mr. Farrow at all.
But seemingly convince the people at the Ministry.
The secretary asked me how I was. Told you it'd be all right.
Oh, and he disguises his voice, not by putting on a fake voice or even doing an impression, he just puts a handkerchief over the phone. He also doctors Farrow's report on the typewriter, and in the deleted scenes, he also fakes Farrow's signature in order to sign papers. Considering the woman at the exchange wasn't fooled by the false voice, and she so happens to be married to a policeman, even if the quartet didn't intervene, I think his scheme would have fallen apart very quickly, leading to his arrest. Now obviously Forrester is a caricature of the businessmen who push the dangerous pesticides in the real world, but his ineptness kind of ruins this, as he was obviously not going to succeed in his plans, unlike them. Although it does still work as commentary, as these people were money-hungry idiots and Forrester is certainly that, but he's just a bit too much of an idiot for the commentary's good. Although I do like that his name means woodsman or forest guardian, something he is technically being, although not who he is. It's both a perfect and ironic name. Since I've been skipping around a bit, I'll catch you up on the adventures of the quartet. They reunite just in time for a cliffhanger. Although it's a cop-out as the cat just leaves them alone in episode 2. Now I don't care for cats and so lack all knowledge about them, but I have it on good authority that episode 2 should have been the first Triton episode, although that's probably the best outcome for the quartet. Ian and Barbara become separated and are taken into the lab, which forces the Doctor and Susan to climb a pipe in order to find them. Now while that does sound crazy, it's surprisingly not, as the Doctor explains,
If you go in there, you'll see it's all corroded, so there's plenty of hand and footholds. That chemical smell means that it's germ-free.
So it does actually make sense. And the obvious danger of this is if someone uses the sink it's connected to, which is the episode 2 cliffhanger. Fortunately, the Doctor and Susan escape into the overflow before climbing into the sink, leading to what to me is the most iconic shot of this episode. The high angle of the two travellers standing in the massive sink, looking up and appearing tiny compared to the world. Probably the best shot of the serial. Really gives the scale of the quartet in a way many other shots just can't. So the quartet reunite, read the formula for DN6, with the Doctor realising how dangerous it is, and so they form a plan to stop Forrester. This leads to a scene of the quartet attempting to use the phone, which I can't describe, so it's fortunate I have visuals. Like with the sink, these are great shots, which give a sense of scale, but are quite funny, which I doubt was the intention. Now although the quartet can't be heard, the woman whose name I should mention is Hilda Rouse later calls the house back and catches Forrester out, and so sends a character who is described on her fandom wiki as her police constable husband Bert to the house. Now I know that's literally what he is, but I think it's just funny that he's referred to as so. Now Bert does actually listen to the phone conversations as well, but Hilda is the one whose suspicions lead to Bert going. This leads to Bert arriving after a failed attempt by the quartet to kill Forrester.
It's coming.
The tap's ready to turn on now.
Okay, so it was actually a plan to set the place on fire to attract attention, but the can happens to explode in Forrester's face, so it was in fact just arson instead of attempted murder. The quartet escape down the drain pipe as Forrester and Smithers are arrested by police constable husband Bert, and from how easily Hilda was able to catch Forrester out, it's very unlikely he would have succeeded, which does lessen the stakes somewhat when you realise how stupid his plan was. So to wrap the plot up, the quartet return to the TARDIS, with the Doctor taking a small souvenir in the form of a massive seed coated in DN6. Although this turns out to be so that he can see if his plan to reverse the shrinking works. Now as I mentioned, the actual reversal of the shrinking isn't exactly explained. All the Doctor says is,
We've got to repeat exactly what the things that happened to us when we landed.
But this just amounts to the lights turning down, the doors don't even open, which seems like an important step in reversing the process, given that presumably the lower space pressure when taking off would cause the ship and crew to revert to their original size, but then presumably everything else would get bigger too. But this doesn't happen as the seed shrinks. And the pesticide inside of Barbara shrinks to harmless levels so she returns to normal. So as I said before, it's not exactly a logical thing in terms of an in-universe sense. I should never try and understand the logic of old Doctor Who science, it really never pans out, especially this early on. So with everything back to normal, the Doctor can attempt another landing, but with the scanner still broken, although seemingly in a different way now, as instead of the glass being broken, the scanner just doesn't display anything, there's no way to see what's outside, but the next episode caption says, World's End. So as I said early on, this serial was made as 4 episodes but was cut down to 3 in post, a very unusual thing. This was ordered by Donald Wilson, the head of serials, as he found the serial was too slow in the second half. Episode 3 was entitled Crisis and the 4th was The Urge to Live. Due to the recording and editing process, that means we have the episode 3 title due to the captions but the episode 4 credits. Beyond that, when it comes to the cut material, as noted, we have more of Forrester's plan and the dead cat, but there's a lot more, although very boring. As the scene in which the quartet read the giant notebook to write down the equation, there was originally an entire scene in which the quartet slowly read through the formula and noted it down. And a decent chunk of episode 4 consisted of the quartet climbing down the pipe. You can definitely see why this stuff was cut. It does sound very boring. But a reconstruction of this is available on the DVD release, with reused footage, a few insert shots, and voice acting by William Russell and Carol Ann Ford, alongside other actors who perform for the rest of the cast. The only other thing cut to note is the cliffhanger of the original episode 3, which was Barbara's collapse from exposure to DN6. So although the opening episode is quite strong, and the message behind the serial is very important, the serial itself is quite a forgettable and boring one, to the point where not even the entire thing was broadcast, with an episode's worth of content being cut and almost certainly lost forever. It does introduce 2 figures behind the scenes who will go on to be very notable within the history of the show, but beyond that it doesn't do a whole lot else. But things are hopefully looking up as Terry Nation and the Daleks make their big return. Next time, the Dalek invasion of Earth.